I was never the type who liked conflict. Ever since I was a kid, I learned that the best way to avoid trouble was to keep my head down and do my work without complaining. At 30, that philosophy still guided me. I was the employee who never showed. Up late, never argued, never questioned the boss's absurd orders. Ricardo Almeida was the typical manager who saw himself as a self-made man, but in reality, he'd only gotten where he was thanks to brown nosing and luck. Tall, always in a perfectly tailored suit, he loved showing off in meetings as if he owned the company. And in a way, he acted like he did. I never complained about the unpaid overtime. I never talked back when he made jokes about my personal life. "Where's your girlfriend, Lucas? Still scaring women away with that funeral face?" I never stood up for myself when he dumped last-minute tasks on me on a Friday afternoon, knowing I'd cancel my plans to deliver. I just wanted peace. Until that damn Friday. Every Friday at 10 a.m., we had a project status meeting. It was a ritual where everyone presented their reports, and Ricardo made sure to rub it in someone's face that their work wasn't good enough. That day, I was the chosen target. I had spent the night before adjusting the data for the Gamma project, a complex report involving market analysis, financial projections, and trend graphs. Not exactly my specialty, but since the analyst in charge was on leave, the work landed on my desk. "Lucas, let's see what you've prepared." Ricardo tapped his fingers on the table, impatient. I opened the presentation and started explaining the numbers. I barely finished the first slide when he cut me off. "This is complete garbage." The room went silent. My coworkers exchanged glances, some with sympathy, others just relieved it wasn't their turn. "Sorry, I don't understand. What exactly needs to be fixed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He grabbed the mouse, flipped through the slides quickly, and stopped on a bar graph. "This looks like intern work, Lucas. You're 30 years old and still can't make a decent chart? Look at this formatting. My 12-year-old daughter could do better in PowerPoint." His tone was mocking, almost theatrical, like he was putting on a show. And in a way, he was. The other employees were his audience, and he wanted to make sure everyone saw who was in charge. My face started to burn, but I took a deep breath. It wasn't the first time he'd humiliated me, so I swallowed my pride and replied, "I understand, Ricardo. I can redo it." He wasn't expecting that. He wanted me to get angry, to argue, to give him an excuse to drag me down even further. But since I didn't react, he decided to push harder. He turned to the group with a sarcastic smile and said, "Look, everyone, Lucas is so incompetent he doesn't even stand up for himself. A real doormat." Someone in the room chuckled. I don't know who it was, but the sound echoed in my head like a slap. That's when something inside me snapped. Up until that point, I took the humiliation because I believed that in the end, my work would speak for itself. That if I just did my part, I'd eventually be recognized. But in that moment, I realized it didn't matter how good I was. Ricardo would never respect me. While he kept talking, now mocking another coworker, I looked around. I saw my teammates' faces, some embarrassed for me, others afraid they'd be next. None of them willing to speak up. And then I understood. It wasn't about the graph. It wasn't about the report. It was about power. Ricardo needed to humiliate others to feel important. And I, the nice guy, the pushover, the doormat, was the perfect target. But in that moment, while he laughed and others laughed along out of fear, a cold fury took hold of me. Enough. I wasn't going to take it anymore. I wasn't going to accept it anymore. If he wanted a war, then he'd get one. And unlike him, I wouldn't play dirty just to show off. I'd play to win. I couldn't sleep. The beer I had after work didn't help at all. The bitter taste of humiliation was still fresh in my mouth, stronger than any drink. My fists were still clenched. The tension in my shoulders felt like it had come to stay. A doormat. Those words echoed in my head like a cruel mantra. It wasn't the first time Ricardo had disrespected me, but it was the first time he made it clear that I was insignificant. And the worst part? It worked. For a moment, I actually felt small. But now, alone in the dark of my room, the feeling that consumed me wasn't helplessness anymore. It was anger, cold, calculated, patient. I turned in bed and grabbed my phone, the bluish light glowing on my face. I opened the Notes app and started typing, "Objective. Destroy Ricardo Almeida." Did it sound dramatic? Maybe. But at that moment, it was exactly what I wanted. Not just to quit the company, not just to report him. I wanted him to feel what it was, like to be crushed. The question was, how? Ricardo wasn't just any boss. He had influence, allies on the board, years of seniority. If I just went to HR and complained about workplace harassment, who would they believe? Him, the successful manager? Or me, the quiet employee who never spoke up? I needed proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. Something that left no room for doubt. That's when I remembered something I overheard months ago in the break room. Two co-workers from another department whispering about how Ricardo always adjusted the numbers in his expense reports. At the time, I ignored it. Office gossip, I thought. But what if it wasn't? I sat up in bed, the gears in my mind spinning fast. Ricardo was arrogant, but he wasn't a genius. If he was doing something shady, he must have left traces, emails, altered documents, something. I smiled in the dark. That was it. I was going to investigate. Slowly, meticulously. Like a silent rat behind the scenes, I'd collect every crumb of dirt he'd left behind. And when I had enough, I'd burn him. I turned off my phone and lay back down, but this time, sleep didn't come. I was too busy planning my revenge. 3 weeks had passed since the public humiliation, and I had become a different version of myself. Outwardly, I was still the same submissive Lucas, the employee who followed orders without question. But inside, I had become a silent hunter, patiently gathering every piece of filth Ricardo had left behind through his years of arrogance and abuse of power. I started with the obvious: emails. As a systems analyst, I had access to the company server, though I wasn't exactly authorized to snoop around where I didn't belong. A security loophole in the firewall let me access Ricardo's inbox without leaving a trace. What I found was a goldmine of misconduct. There were conversations with vendors where they clearly agreed on inflated values, with the difference being sent to an undeclared account. Messages with the finance department, pressuring them to adjust certain expenses in the quarterly reports. The most damning was an email thread with an executive from another company discussing a kickback scheme in exchange for contracts. But emails weren't enough. I needed something more concrete, undeniable. That's when I started recording our interactions. A discreet voice recorder in my shirt pocket captured every demeaning comment, every absurd order, every moment Ricardo crossed the line into workplace abuse. The most valuable audio came from a closed-door meeting where he, thinking we were alone, said, "That compliance bullshit is just for show. As long as I've got the board's backing, I can do whatever the hell I want around here." But the real trophy came when I uncovered a sexual harassment case. 2 colleagues from the marketing department, Marina and Carla, had been victims of his inappropriate advances. At first, they were hesitant to speak up, afraid they wouldn't be taken seriously or might face retaliation. But when I showed them the evidence I already had and promised full discretion and support, they finally agreed to give written statements. Marina, with tears in her eyes, told how he had pressured her for months, sending inappropriate messages and threatening her job when she rejected him. Carla revealed that Ricardo had invited her to a business meeting at a hotel where he tried to forcibly kiss her. In my secret file, an encrypted folder on my laptop, I now had screenshots of incriminating emails, audio recordings of workplace harassment, signed statements about sexual harassment, altered financial documents. Every night before bed, I reviewed the material. imagining the moment it would all come to light. Ricardo didn't know it, but while he continued his reign of terror, I was weaving the web that would destroy him. The only thing left to decide was when and how to pull the trigger. But one thing was certain. Once I did, there would be no turning back, and this time he'd be the one left defenseless. The day I chose was perfect. The company was holding its quarterly assembly with the entire board in attendance. Ricardo, of course, was the center of attention. Immaculate suit, confident smile, that smug superiority I'd grown to hate. He loved these moments, where he could show off as the great leader. He had no idea it would be his last day walking into that building as a manager. I arrived early with my laptop and a flash drive in my pocket. My hands were cold, but not from nerves. It was the tense calm of someone about to change everything. I had rehearsed this moment in my head for weeks. Now it was time to act. The meeting began as usual. Project updates, quarterly numbers, projections for the next year. When it was Ricardo's turn to present his results, he puffed out his chest and launched into his usual speech about operational excellence and visionary leadership. That's when I raised my hand. Sorry to interrupt. Ricardo, before you continue, I'd like to clarify a few points about the Gamma project. He froze for a fraction of a second, eyes narrowing at me. No one ever interrupted him. Lucas, this can wait. We're discussing... Actually, it can't. My voice was calm, but firm. There are some serious inconsistencies that need to be addressed. Here, let me show you. Without waiting for permission, I connected my laptop to the projector. The screen behind Ricardo changed, displaying a series of emails I had collected. The first was from him to a supplier agreeing on inflated pricing. The room went silent. What the hell is this? Ricardo was pale. Is this some kind of joke? A joke? I clicked a button. The next image was a bank statement showing regular deposits to an account in the Cayman Islands. No, Ricardo, this is evidence of corporate fraud, the board members began whispering. One of the senior directors stood up. Where did you... Get this, Lucas. It's all documented. I switched to the next slide. Transcripts of audio recordings with Ricardo admitting to bypassing compliance policies. And there's more. That's when I showed the testimonies from the women, signed, detailed, about the sexual harassment. One of them, Marina, was in the room. When her name appeared on the screen, she raised her head and gave a simple nod of confirmation. Ricardo exploded. This is a setup! You're trying to ruin me because you can't handle the pressure of the job. His face was red, neck veins bulging. I'll sue you for defamation, you little shit. That's when the CEO, who had been silent until then, raised his hand. That's enough. His voice cut through the air like a knife. Ricardo, you are suspended, effective immediately. The board will review these accusations, but based on what I've seen here... He looked at me, then back at Ricardo. You should leave. Now. For a moment, I thought Ricardo might have a stroke. He looked at me with such pure hatred I could almost feel it physically. But then, without a word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind a heavy silence and the echo of his fall. I took a deep breath and shut off the presentation. The war was far from over. There would still be investigations, lawsuits, maybe retaliation. But at that moment, as the board members called me into a private meeting and my colleagues stared at me with a mix of awe and fear, I knew one thing. Ricardo Almeida would never humiliate anyone in that company again. And me? I was no one's doormat anymore. The office was never the same after that day. Ricardo was removed immediately, and in the days that followed, all anyone could talk about was the scandal. Some co-workers looked at me with hidden admiration. Others avoided eye contact, as if thinking, if he took down the manager, what might he do to a regular teammate? The board called me in to testify for the internal investigation. I brought everything. copies of emails, recordings, altered financial documents. But the most important were the testimonies from the women who had been harassed. Once the board saw the extent of the evidence, there was no defense that could save Ricardo. 2 days later, the CEO announced Ricardo's termination for cause. But it didn't stop there. The company filed charges for embezzlement, and the sexual harassment claims reached the press. Within a week, Ricardo Almeida, the arrogant boss everyone feared, had become a pariah in the industry. 3 weeks later, I was at my cubicle when I got the email. "Lucas, please report to the executive. Boardroom at 3 p.m. Subject, team restructuring." My heart raced. Was I getting fired? Retaliation? When I walked into the room, the CEO and the head of HR were waiting. "Have a seat, Lucas," the CEO said, studying my face. "You've caused a major earthquake around here." "I only showed the truth," I replied. He tilted his head slightly. "Which is exactly why we want you as our new project manager." I almost choked. "I'm sorry, what?" "We need someone who's not afraid to do the right thing. Someone with integrity." He smiled. "Provided you're willing to go through some intensive management training." 1 month later, my first meeting as manager felt surreal. The team looked at me with a mix of curiosity, some still unsure, others hopeful. "Simple changes," I said, holding up a sheet of paper. "Overtime will be paid or compensated. No more last-minute tasks on Fridays. And if anyone has a problem, my door is open." That's when Marina, one of the women who had come forward about the harassment, asked, "And what if the problem is you?" The room went quiet. "Then you go to HR, just like you should." I smiled. "No one is untouchable here, not even me." 6 months later, I got a message from an unknown number. "You destroyed my career. Think you got away with it?" Of course, it was Ricardo. I replied with a photo of myself in my new office, the door plaque clearly visible. Senior Project Manager. "It was never about getting away with it, Ricardo. It was about justice." Then I blocked the number and got back to work. Life, after all, moved on, only now on my own terms.